Good afternoon and welcome to the San Francisco Planning Commission regular hearing for Thursday, June 11th, 2015. I'd like to remind members of the audience that the Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence any mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong.
Here.
Commissioner Antonini.
Present.
Commissioner Hillis. Here. And Commissioner Richards.
Here.
We expect Commissioners Moore and Wu to be absent and Commissioner Johnson to arrive late. Good afternoon and welcome to the San Francisco Planning Commission regular hearing for Thursday, June 11th, 2015. I'd like to remind members of the audience that the Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence any mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong.
Here.
Commissioner Antonini.
Present.
Commissioner Hillis. Here. And Commissioner Richards.
Here.
We expect Commissioners Moore and Wu to be absent and Commissioner Johnson to arrive late. Commissioners, first on your agenda is your continuance calendar. Items 1A and B for case numbers 2014.1426 C and V at 4022 through 4026 24th Street are proposed for continuance to June 25th, 2015. Item 2 for case number 2015-000060 CUA at 327 Capitol Avenue is proposed for continuance to July 9th, 2015. And further, under your discretionary review calendar, Commissioners, we have received confirmation that item 10 for case number 2015-000207 DRP at 290 Maple Street, a discretionary review, has been withdrawn.
Good.
Okay, is there any public comment on the items proposed for continuance? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed.
Move to continue items 1A and 2 to the date specified.
Second.
On that motion to continue items as proposed, Commissioner Antonini?
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Commission President Fong?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 4-0. Zoning Administrator, what say you?
Continue item 1B to the date specified.
Thank you. Commissioners, that'll place you under your consent calendar. All matters listed here under constitute a consent calendar are considered to be routine by the Planning Commission and may be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the Commission. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the Commission, the public, or staff so requests, in which event the matter shall be removed from the consent calendar and considered as a separate item at this or a future hearing. Item 3, case number 2015-003838 C and D at 1230 Mason Street, a condominium conversion subdivision. And item 4 for case number 2014-000914 CUA at 809 Sacramento Street, conditional use authorization.
Is there any public comment on the 2 items on the consent calendar? Not seeing any public comment. Public comment is closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Move to approve items 3 and 4.
Second.
On that motion to approve matters under your consent calendar, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously and places you under Commission matters. Item 5, consideration of adoption draft minutes for the May 14th, 2015 Rules Committee meeting and the draft minutes for the May 28th, 2015 regular hearing.
Is there any public comment on draft minutes? Not seeing any public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
I was a little bit confused on the meeting minutes for the 14th. I thought that the Rules Committee meeting minutes we were going to kind of punt to July 2nd. No?
We are not the minutes, the actual hearing on the rules and regulations. We did continue to July 2nd.
Okay. And that'll include all the
And that will include essentially the same as the minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
On that motion, then, to adopt the minutes for May 14th Rules Committee and May 28th regular hearing, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 4-0 and places you on item 6, Commission comments and questions.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I grew up out in the Pleasant and Livermore area, happened to be out there the other day driving along Burnell Avenue on my way to 680 and noticed that some land was under construction with the appearance it might be developed, probably housing, couldn't really say what it was going to be. But the land is owned by the City of San Francisco PUC, and we own a huge amount of land there to the south of Burnell Avenue, and part of that land was developed some years ago for residences and for a small shopping area. Really well done. And my understanding was the city sold that land and someone else developed it. I don't really know for sure, but I'm kind of curious as to what's going on with this parcel of land because, you know, I don't think it's wise to sell land. I mean, we should continue to hold that land. It's worth a lot, and when you hold it, you get the revenue from the rental, and you also get the appreciation. So just like privately, it's wise to hold on to your land, particularly in very desirable areas. And we should consider some of that land to be self-developed. We could build housing there. We could build affordable housing. We could build, you know, supportive housing. We build a lot of mid-income housing out there, and I'm not sure we would get the credit for the RENA Golds because it's technically in Alameda County, even though it's our land. But the whole concept of dividing these RENA Golds up by counties is kind of a fallacy because the whole Bay Area is very behind on its housing needs, and to kind of arbitrarily draw lines at a certain point, particularly in the case of San Francisco, doesn't make a lot of sense. We should collectively, as a region, be able to meet these goals, and you know, we should have shared RENA objectives that go throughout the entire Bay Area. Anyway, that was also the subject of a meeting I was attended yesterday. I was a guest at the Bay Area Council, and one of the subjects that was discussed was a assessment of our performance in providing housing units over the last 15 years, and it's pretty abominable. This is not so much San Francisco. Actually, we're one of the better ones in comparison to a lot of the rest of the Bay Area, particularly the coastal regions. California as a whole has been really bad compared to the rest of the country, but particularly coastal California, for a variety of reasons, has been poor in providing additional housing, and all you have to do is look outside of the borders of San Francisco and see very little being built in adjoining counties in most instances. So it's a big problem, but that was a very interesting hearing.
Commissioner Richards.
I received an email from a citizen in, I think, District 2, who Supervisor Farrell's office had referred to me regarding what I'd call the stay of execution of a potentially landmark tree. And I read the process that was attached to it, and I sent a nomination into the Department of Public Works, the Department of Forestry, thinking that was kind of going to get the landmark tree designation process going. Unbeknownst to me, I realized that in the process that actually, since I was the nominator and I was allowed to nominate it, it should come before the Planning Commission, and I asked that send all the paperwork to the director, to the secretary, and to the president and vice president of the commission. I'd like to have that scheduled. If that process still holds true, it would be an interesting process, and it was an avenue I didn't even know existed before.
Yes, in order to be nominated, it would have to be by the Planning Commission,
right,
or the director or the Historic Preservation Commission. They've all that same person was reached out to everyone. So if you wish, through the direction of the commission president, we could certainly calendar that for next week.
I'd love it.
All right.
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, Commissioners, we can move on to the Director's report under Department Matters, item 7.
Thank you, Jonas. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just one quick announcement, just a change of date of one item. You had continued an item at 525 Harrison till, I think, the middle of July. But then there was also a proposal to bring back a kind of design discussion with you at an earlier date to talk about the design of that building. We had talked later in June for that meeting, but we have moved that up till next week, till June 18th. So the design review discussion of that project will happen next week on June 18th. That's my only item today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Item 8, review of past week's events at the Board of Supervisors, Board of Appeals, and the Historic Preservation Commission.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Planning Department staff. At this week's Board Land Use Committee meeting, there was no Planning Department items. At the full board, the board heard the 2 short-term rental ordinances. One was sponsored by Supervisor Campos, Marr, and Avalos, and one was sponsored by the Mayor and Supervisor Farrell. The Planning Commission heard these items at their April 23rd hearing and took 15 separate votes on various motions. At the full board hearing, the Planning Department was represented by Director Rame, Anne-Marie Rogers, Scott Sanchez, and myself. However, we were not called on during the hearing to answer any questions. Supervisor Farrell used his speaking time to make a motion to continue the 2 items 1 month to July 14th. This motion was seconded by Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Campos asked that his ordinance be removed from the motion because he wanted a yes or no vote on the proposal that day. Supervisor Avalos used his opportunity to speak to make a motion to terminate debate and move the items to a vote, which requires a 2/3 vote. The motion was seconded by Supervisors Campos and Marr, but it ultimately failed on a 5-6 vote, with Supervisors Breed, Christensen, Cohen, Farrell, Tang, and Weiner voting against the motion. When Supervisor Farrell's motion came up for continuance, it passed on a 7-4 vote, with Supervisors Avalos, Campos, Kim, and Marr voting against the motion. In general, those supervisors that voted in favor of the continuance did so because they wanted more time to come up with an ordinance that the majority of the board could vote for. In general, those that did not vote for the continuance were skeptical that a compromise could be reached in 1 month. When the board already had 8 months to come up with a compromise ordinance. That was all for the Planning Commission, or for Planning Department items at the board. There were 3 introductions. 2 were reintroductions, one for the Divisadero Street Neighborhood Commercial District and one for the Fillmore Street Neighborhood Commercial District. Those ordinances were modified to take in the Commission's recommended modifications. And then there was a hearing request on the status report on the legalization of existing dwelling units installed without a permit, and that will be heard at the Land Use Committee. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment on the report? Okay, public comments
Do
closed.
you have the Board of Appeals report from last
you.
night? There are, I think, 3 items that the Commission may be interested in. The first was an appeal of the Section 309 authorization for 150 Van Ness that you approved earlier this year. There were multiple entitlements that were authorized for this project, including a variance conditional use. This was the only appeal was on the Section 309 authorization. As part of that, I had determined that in your deliberations, you could consider an exception from the lot coverage requirement, which is 80% at floors at which not all of the units face a street. And as the project was before you, there were units at every level that did not face onto the street, so it would have been subject to grade for that 80% lot coverage requirement. The appeal challenged a couple of items. First, that the zoning administrator had the authority to determine that you could hear that as a Section 309 authorization. They also had concerns about the project itself and the impacts on the LaPorte School. The appeal was made by parents of the students of the LaPorte School and their concerns about the impacts on the property line windows of that property, which is at 50 Fell. The board considered these concerns, and also during the appeal process, the appellants raised concerns about the calculations that were provided by the project sponsor. We did review those calculations and determined that they were not completely accurate. Before you was authorization for an exception for 83.4%. The calculation at the ground floor was more accurately 89%, which we found is not in conformance with the Commission's decision. At the second level, it was 83.9%, 0.5% off, which is about 200 square feet, which we said was in conformance, substantial conformance with the Commission's decision. And above that, the project was compliant. At the hearing, the board did grant the appeal to make changes to the project to eliminate the need for an exception at the ground story, and this was proposed by the project sponsor. They had 3 hotel rooms that were part of the project. These were hotel rooms that were meant to be for the tenants of the building that they could have visitors stay on short-term rental, and those were moved to spaces that were previously occupied by the dwelling units on the interior. So with that change, there were no dwelling units that were facing, all dwelling units at the ground level were facing the street. So there's no need for an exception at that level, and they upheld the rest of the project. So that was ultimately their decision, and that vote was unanimous. Two other items, 2744 Steiner Street, which was a discretionary review that you heard on December 18th. There were concerns related to impacts, light and air, to the adjacent property at 2748 Steiner, which is to the north and downhill, because this is a downsloping portion of Steiner. And with that, the commission did take DR on this and had a 2'6" reduction in the extension of the project, something that the project sponsor had at one point proposed to the neighbor, but the neighbor rejected. There's still an appeal filed on it, and the board unanimously upheld the decision of the Planning Commission here. Last item, 435 10th Avenue. This was a DR that you heard on January 22nd. It was a horizontal addition, and the main concern stemmed from impacts on privacy. This had a deck that was set back about 8 feet from the side property line. There were stairs that were set back 5 feet, and then further on, additional 3 feet, the deck was set back. The board unanimously upheld the commission's decision not to take DR in that case as well. That's all I have to report.
Thank you.
There was no Historic Preservation Commission meeting yesterday, so if there's nothing further, Commissioners, we can move on to general public comment not to exceed a period of 15 minutes. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes. I have no speaker cards.
Yes, my name is Michael Nolte, and I'm representing John Q. Public. Last week's meeting was posted on SF.gov, and it was all messed up, so people can't see the audio and visual connected together. So I don't know if there's something that could be done about that. I don't know if it's been fixed, but when it was first put up, it wasn't working right. Second, today at this hearing, there's no closed caption of this meeting currently posted on the viewing, and we currently have people in the audience that are hard of hearing individuals, so they can't hear what's being said. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Welsh, and I would like to speak to the question of affordability of housing, which is certainly within the purview of this commission. And I noticed that there's a number of projects coming up in the Tenderloin where large new developments are being planned. And it seems to me that especially in that neighborhood, although in any neighborhood in San Francisco, there should be priority given to below market rate housing. And the term below market rate is a very variable term. It could be just a little bit below market rate and not have any real impact on what the person has to pay for their housing. I believe that there should be genuine market rate housing, particularly in that neighborhood, and there should be a requirement on any builder, any building company, or any developer that wants to put up housing in the Tenderloin, that they have genuinely market rate housing at least 50% of the units that they build there. I mean, I think this is an outrageous situation in San Francisco, what the rents are. I think everybody understands that. And the way to approach it, I think, is to start right away with new developments, approving only those that provide for genuinely market rate, below market rate housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is John Nolte, and I'm here to, again, talk about last week's meeting in which the chair misconstrued last names. And as you see, I have a brother, and so I'm speaking on behalf of last names. peoples with last names can be either related, non-related, brothers, siblings, etc., or are non-related. And so when the chair came to both my brothers and my speaker cards, he thought it was the same person. And we have this problem, and it's an ongoing problem, not with this commission, but we've had it with other commissions and board supervisors. So I caution the chairs when they read those speaker cards not to assume that they are the same person.
Thank you. Well noted. Is there any additional general public comment? Okay, public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards?
I guess a question I have, one of the speakers mentioned the requirement for BMR units, and maybe the city attorney might be able to give a 2 or 3 sentence explanation on what the limits are, in just asking for anything on affordability. Is that something we could do here?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Barrett, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
One of the speakers indicated that all future development should have a certain percentage of BMR units. I know there's limits put on what actually can be required by Prop C. Is there any way you could give a quick explanation, because I'm getting this all the time when I walk down the street as well? Can I clarify that?
The zoning administrator can speak to it.
Right.
So the planning code does contain requirements for below market rate units. And the flexibility to change the current code requirements may be somewhat limited to Prop C, but otherwise we are bound by what's in the planning code to apply. So we do have planning code requirements that we implement. And I mean, it's generally 12%. Generally applies to dwelling units. Depending on zoning districts, there are specific code provisions for somewhat higher levels of affordability, but otherwise we have a set requirement in the code that has also been codified through the Prop C process as well.
Thank you.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, we can move on to your regular calendar. Items 9A and B. For case numbers 2012.0086 EV and X at 101 Hyde Street. This is a Section 309 determination of compliance, and the zoning administrator will consider variances.
Good afternoon, President Fong and members of the Commission, Kate Connor, Planning Department staff. You have before you a project to construct an 8-story, 85-unit building with approximately 4,900 square feet of ground floor retail space and 15 off-street parking spaces at 101 Hyde Street. 10 inclusionary housing units will be provided on site. The property is developed with a 1-story structure that is currently leased to the United States Postal Service as a limited-use facility. The project is located in the C3G zoning district and the ADX Height and Bulk district. The project sponsor will give a presentation regarding the design of the project, but I would like to focus on a number of the policy and regulatory issues. In order to proceed, the project requires a granting of 2 entitlements, a downtown project authorization and a variance. The project requires determination under Planning Code Section 309, including the granting of 2 exceptions for ground level wind currents and for rear yard requirements. The code allows a project to seek exception from strict compliance with certain sections of the code, provided that the Commission makes certain findings. Compliance with the criteria for wind and the rear yard exceptions is described in the motion in your packets. I'm available to discuss this exception in detail if you have any questions, but in short, staff believes that the requested exceptions are warranted and meet the criteria established in the code. The project requires variances from the exposure requirement and the bay window dimensions. The majority of dwelling units comply with exposure by either facing Golden Gate Avenue or Hyde Street. There are 28 units on levels 2 through 8 that require an exposure variance because they face the courtyard, which does not meet the minimum rear yard requirements. As such, the project is seeking a variance from the exposure requirements pursuant to Planning Code Section 140. The project includes a corner element that exceeds standard bay window requirements. The projection is approximately 4 feet, and the length is 29 feet on Golden Gate Avenue and 22 feet on Hyde Street. The corner element is an architectural feature of the project. As such, the project is seeking a variance for the permitted obstructions, which are stipulated in Planning Code Section 136. The zoning administrator will opine on these variances after the commission takes an action on the Section 309 determination. The department has received 2 letters in support of the project since your packets have been distributed, 1 correspondence in opposition of the project, 1 neutral email regarding the proposal. In addition, the department has received 3 emails voicing concern about the demolition of the post office and the effects on mail delivery and the availability of post office boxes in the area. The USPS will provide services through a nearby branch at Fox Plaza, which is approximately 4 blocks away. The USPS is currently pursuing an expansion of the existing Fox Plaza post office in anticipation of this closure. They also anticipate that completion of the expansion will be done in October of 2015. The USPS also noted that general mail delivery service for customers would be accommodated through a 500 to 800 square foot location within the vicinity of 101 Hyde. In conclusion, the department supports the project because it meets the goals and objectives of the general plan to create new housing close to jobs in downtown, with access to public transit and within a walkable urban context. The project is necessary and desirable and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and meets all applicable requirements of the code, aside from the exceptions requested through the 309 application and the variances. Staff recommends that the Commission approve this project with conditions. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Project sponsor, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Erickson. I'd like to thank the commissioners and the planning staff, in particular Kate Connor, who has shepherded this project from the beginning, starting almost 4 years ago. I have managed 101 Hyde Street for the Merit Trust for over 30 years. Merit Trust has owned 101 Hyde Street since the 1960s. First, it was a Bank of America for about 20 years, and subsequently it's been leased to the United States Postal Service as a limited facility. Over 5 years ago, the 101 Hyde Street Civic Center Post Office was placed on the closure list, which caused us to reevaluate the property for its best use. Almost 4 years ago, November 2011, a plan was implemented for the redevelopment in conjunction with the San Francisco Planning Department for 101 Hyde that we are presenting to you today. You have before you a very comprehensive package prepared by your staff. I'd like to point out just 3 highlights of the project. 1, the project does not displace any local residents. Instead, it creates 85 new units with 12% or 10 on-site inclusionary BMR units. 2, the project will be adding 6 3-bedroom family units, which are new to the Tenderloin. 3, the current post office holders will be moved but 3 blocks away to the United States Postal Service Fox Plaza facility. We have worked hard and long to accommodate the input from the SF planning staff in the neighborhood. Outreach to the neighborhood has included Randy Shaw at the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, David Seward of the UC Hastings College of Law, Supervisor Kim, TNDC, the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, Alliance for Better District 6, and the Tenderloin Police Captain Jason Chernus. Thank you for your consideration and support of the 101 Hyde Street project, and now I'd like to introduce the architect Albert Costa.
Good afternoon, President Fong, members of the Commission, planning staff. I'm Albert Costa from Costa Brown Architecture. I'm the architect for the project. I want to give you a quick overview of the proposed project in front of you. The proposed project in front of you is an 8-story, 85-unit mixed-use building with ground floor retail and residential units above. There will be 1 level below grade with 15 off-street parking spaces. The design process with the planning staff was lengthy and thorough, resulting in the design that's presented here today. We worked extensively with the Planning Department's Urban Design Advisory Team, who recommended numerous modifications, including the moving of the rear yard setback, or the required rear yard, to the inside corner of the site because it's a corner site, to create a consistent street wall along Golden Gate and Hyde Street, thus forming an L-shaped building configuration. On the west side of the project, we also have provided a matching light well. In general, the project intends to utilize green construction materials and methods, including a state-of-the-art air filtration system for the residences, while also taking advantage of the natural components of the site, natural light and air, operable windows, and a well-appointed rooftop. We will be providing common open space at the second level and the roof. And over the course of our outreach, we have received only positive support from the community. In summary, we're very excited about this project, the design. We believe the project will reinvigorate this corner of the Tenderloin. And I want to thank planning staff for their help. Especially I want to thank Kate Connor for her persistence over the years and her assistance. And this concludes my presentation. We're available for questions and clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We may have questions for you, but opening it up to public comment first. David Welsh. And I'm gonna call this 4 times, but there's a Michael Nolte, a Michael Nolte, a Michael Nolte, and a Michael Nolte for the same item, just in case there are 4 different Michael Noltes. Alice Lindstrom and John Nolte.
Before I start my public comment, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Not be in my time?
No.
No.
You can ask your question, and
all right.
There's no dialogue, but you can ask.
All right. Yes, I would like to speak against this proposal. In every city, there has to be a general delivery for people who have no address, and also for people who have an address but where the mail is not secure. Also for people traveling to the city, people who are coming into the city who don't yet have an address, or people who are moving to the city. General delivery is a very important part of the Postal Service. So far, the Postal Service has not located or has not announced that they have located a general delivery location where people in the neighborhood can pick up their mail, including homeless people, many people who live in SRO housing, and others who really need to have a general delivery. I would propose that this project not be approved until the Postal Service comes up with guaranteed place and location that is convenient to the people in the neighborhood where people can pick up their mail. This is very essential, and I think this is a function of the Planning Commission to make sure that the mail service for the people is not disrupted. Secondly, I think this should be disapproved because it's primarily market rate housing according to the proposal. And I think that we need to have, as I expressed before, more genuinely affordable housing, particularly in the inner city. In addition, I just saw a picture of the building, the proposed building. It's very ugly. I mean, that's also a consideration for the Planning Commission. We don't need any more ugly buildings. Back to the drawing board with this proposal. And the main thing I'd like to stress is that the general delivery be readily available to the people in the neighborhood, and that this should be a condition that's imposed upon the developers before it's approved. Thank you.
Thank you. I've called a few other names. Paul Lovinger? Yes. Okay.
I'm Paul W. Lovinger of Post Office Patrons. We request a continuance. The 101 Hyde Street project description begins, request for determination of compliance pursuant to Planning Code Section 309 with exceptions to the requirements for rear yard pursuant to Planning Code Sections 305, 136, and 140. None of them deals with a rear yard. I did find it under 134, so someone erred. What else is wrong with this project? Well, the proposed destruction of the postal building by a Los Angeles trust for an 8-story, 85-apartment building will cause significant environmental harm. It's not just the dust and noise of construction and then added traffic congestion. It would disrupt the lives of many postal patrons, yet no plans have been made for them. Until things are arranged, we need a continuance. My official address is a box in that post office. Many box holders who depend on the mail for their livelihood would likely lose their addresses and hence lose income. And the city's sole general delivery window is there. A post office could be included in the plans. The Postal Service once promised the patrons full service. The neighborhood needs it. Trees would be destroyed. This parched region can ill afford the loss of any more trees. A work of art on both outside walls called Humming with Life, painted by Joanna Potig and 5 other artists in 2011, would die. It should be preserved or redone. Doesn't the Tenderloin deserve any beauty? And into that low-income neighborhood intrudes luxury housing. It threatens renters, seniors, anyone not well off. Any housing built now should be affordable. Among the Planning Code's purposes, per Section 101, are protecting the general welfare and the character and stability of local areas. This project misses the mark. On top of all those social and physical upheavals, the developers want exemptions from the law. Their plans are out of harmony with the Planning Code's dimension requirements for bay windows, and the code requires that at least one room of any apartment overlook an open area, like a street or courtyard. They don't want to follow it for 28 apartments. Then there's the rear yard requirement in the section that someone failed to cite. To use the code's words, it's unclear what exceptional or extraordinary circumstances demand all these variances, especially when this project is so detrimental to the public welfare. We say no.
Thank you.
I'm Alice Lindstrom. My name was called, but I didn't realize I was supposed to stand up at that sequence. Is it all right?
Okay. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I was a postal clerk and working general delivery and main office boxes from 1966 through 1990, off and on as a window pool clerk who circulated among the other 38 retail stations that were in place in San Francisco at that time. It was important that the boxes and the general delivery be coordinated. The same people went back and forth between having a box and getting their mail at general delivery. And there were a lot of tourists and people in between things. It was also important that in the same building they be able to buy stamps and the clerks circulate between the different things so there was adequate staffing wherever it was needed. That beautiful building, which belonged to the public, some of you may recall it, the post office was pushed out by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. First of all, drywall came across the best half of the ladies' room. Then it kept moving and moving and moving, and finally the post office was entirely pushed out of that building. That building was saved from a fire after the 1906 earthquake by the postal clerks who stayed there, kept wetting mail sacks from the stream in the basement and dousing the building and climbing on the roof and everything until the fire went past and everything around it was burned down. But the U.S. Court of Appeals has taken it all over. My eventual hope, and I would hope the Planning Commission could do something about this, is that the public can once again have access to that building, because hardly ever anyone gets access to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And, you know, if we could get it back, I mean, the Court of Appeals, all they need is the top floor anyway, if they would associate with people who are not on the court. But anyway, on the subject of the current situation, which I hope would be interim until we can get back in the main building, the post office has not, first of all, the owner should not have taken a clue that when the post office put that among 4 stations in San Francisco that they wanted to close, that meant that the post office was going to get away with closing it. The unions in the neighborhood rallied and saved that post office, and they're doing it again. And this is because it's important to have a post office in the Tenderloin. That movement was the closest the post office could get to the old main office at 7th and Mission. And Fox Plaza is a long way for people who are handicapped and disabled to make that trek, and it sort of violates the original understanding. So I think it would be good to have full-service post offices both places, and that, however that can be worked out. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Pascarillo, V. Hunan, and David Seward.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I request a continuance on this matter because box holders have not received any notice of the closure or replacement of their post office boxes. I am a box holder there, have been for over 15 years. That continuance should be until the planner assigned to this matter, this case, has been notified by the United States Postal Service of definite and guaranteed replacement for these post office boxes, and all box holders themselves should be notified of the replacement of their post office boxes. The document on the screen now is the original preliminary mitigated negative declaration. It was defective. I filed a letter with the Planning Department, and I'm going to read from that. On the subject of the preliminary mitigated negative declaration for 101 Hyde Street, please note that this document, confer cover page, and that's what you're seeing now on the screen, is defective because the phone number given for the staff contact is a non-working phone number, 415-557-9022. Please recirculate this preliminary mitigated negative declaration for 101 Hyde Street to all concerned parties in view of the above-mentioned defect. In addition, regarding Section 11, Public Services, which is quoting from that document, quote, that the project would result in substantial adverse physical impacts associated with the provision of or the need for new or physically altered governmental facilities, end quote. Please note that I rent one of approximately 2,000 post office boxes at 101 Hyde Street and have for more than 15 years. Since there are no plans to replace or relocate these post office boxes, demolition of 101 Hyde Street would result in enormous disruption and hardship for these box holders and substantial disruption to my business and personal life. I get virtually all of my mail there. Therefore, this demolition should not be permitted. In addition, the Fox Plaza Post Office is scheduled to be demolished at or about the same time as 101 Hyde Street, which will mean that there will be a period of time when general delivery will not be available to any patrons or in downtown San Francisco at either 101 Hyde Street or Fox Plaza Postal Facility. This is another reason 101 Hyde Street should not be demolished. Please grant us a continuance to be better informed as all of the people most directly affected by this, all the box holders. Thank you.
Hi, my name is V. Huynh, and I get my mail there at 101 Hyde Street. I get general delivery mail. And I just happened to run across the sign that was posted on the lamppost around there. That's how I knew that it was about to be demolished. But that wasn't really adequate enough because they posted that on April 15th, and on April 15th, a lot of people are doing their taxes, and they gave us only 20 days to comment on it. But in order to comment, you were supposed to submit a check for over $500 to, I forgot the entity or agency that requested that, and that's ridiculous. A lot of people who get general delivery there can't afford that kind of money just to comment on it. So I'm commenting and making my opinions known here. I really do not want to lose 101 Hyde Street, as that's where I'm registered to vote. I get all my voting materials there. That's where the address I gave to Department of Social Services in order for me to get, very necessary survival benefits such as CalFresh. In other words, my EBT card, which also is known as food stamp, and Medi-Cal has that office too. And I think I'm probably not the only person that relies on that address, as I don't have any other more steady address. A lot of homeless people and transients really need 101 Hyde Street. And this morning I contacted Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi's office to see if they knew anything about the demolition and elimination of 101 Hyde Street. And they got only 4 phone calls before I did, and they were told that the post office had not really have a specific, firm place for people to get their mail at. They were thinking of carving a window at 1390 at the place that is mentioned as Fox Plaza that was mentioned earlier. And then I just heard from Nick that place is planned for demolish too. So if you demolish both places, where are the poor people going to get their general delivery mail? So it just seems to me like, also there's no CEQA. There's no environmental report requested of this development. And so it just seems like it's a rush job and not very well thought out or planned and communicated to all the people affected by it. So I agree with Nick. We do need a continuance.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is John Nolte. I'm going to discuss some of the things were not brought up in the presentation. This is the square block in your packet, and here's Golden Gate. We have right here, this is open space. This is open space for 4 properties. Then we have across the street, this is the Y. This is also Hastings property, and that's another playground. And that, again, open space. And nothing was discussed about the shadows on this open space right now, which was, right now, as you can see, it's a basketball court, a volleyball court, it's open space. And then right over here on the side of Hastings Law School is open space for the students. And again, that's open space. They have planters there and tables there, and that's going to be all impacted by this 18-month process for the demolish and rebuilding of this property. And nothing has been talked about in your packets about that. So I have a problem with those. Then we're talking about the post office. This is the actual number. Again, misinformation in your packet. This is the actual number, how many boxes are at this location. Almost 8,000 boxes. Underutilized, well, 8,000. And then we have 300 boxes for packages. So that is a lot bigger facility than was even discussed and misinformation given, because when you use round numbers, you never come up with that. That's an exact number. So, the current property at Golden Gate and Hyde side has, behind the 3 properties that were discussed, you're taking away open space. You're taking away the parking spaces between the 3 properties. Then the proposed ground floor, 3 proposed spaces. The proposed 18 months construction affects the traffic on Hyde for 280 funerals, fire department, and dignitaries to the city, which will be all impacted for the 18 months in which the construction is done. And that will be affecting, again, that major corridor, one-way street of Hyde Street. The loss of the post office with no plans to replace it at the current site with 7,989 boxes and 300 storage spaces, general delivery, and packages picked up for 94102 residents at that site. That was never discussed either. Until the relocation plans for the post office is in place and signed lease by the post office, then I suggest a continuance until all parties are solved. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is David Seward. I'm with Hastings College of Law. We strongly support this project. The conditions along Golden Gate Avenue are still extremely undesirable. They're dangerous. The post office facility has been problematic in terms of crime, drug dealing, violence. I think the Postal Service has not done the city or this community service. We are in full agreement that there does need to be a full-service post office supporting the Tenderloin, but that is in the purview of the Postal Service, and they apparently do not have that as a priority. But the current conditions at Golden Gate and Hyde are extremely problematic. It is a haven for drug dealing. The crime activity is extremely high. It is one of the worst blocks in the neighborhood. This project would put much needed eyes on the street, increasing the safety, livability of the community. It will increase housing stock. It will provide additional foot traffic to support neighborhood business, and it will improve the livability and vitality of a very challenged stretch of Golden Gate Avenue. So speaking for UC Hastings, we again strongly support this project and are willing to work whatever we can do to make this go forward. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please.
My name is William Porter. I'm a disabled veteran and a historic photographer, and I had a post office box there at the Civic Center facility. I hesitate to call it a post office because it is only that in name only, because you can receive mail if you have a post office box or a general delivery. That's it. You can't buy a stamp. You can't even mail a letter. They don't even have a blue drop box outside. So it's, and the reason why I have a post office box there is I had a studio in the Tenderloin that I couldn't receive mail on the premises, so I had it there. After they closed the main post office, which I had had a post office box since '73 there, so in '89 they closed that one, and then I got this one. Somehow I had thought that the post office was more stable than that, that it was the one institution that you didn't have to worry about it going out of business or closing. But in any case, I'm concerned about the address changes that will be involved as part of this. I called the post office representative today, this morning, when they were announcing that they might close it as a general cost-cutting factor in 2012, and they didn't know anything about it. They didn't have any idea as to where if it was going to go to Fox Plaza. And my concern is my invoices, business cards, letterheads all have that address printed on it. All my veteran benefits are listed at that address that I receive. All my car title, even my DMV driver's license has that address on it. And there doesn't seem to be any concern or anything in place, although it's not necessarily your preview, as to who or if they would even compensate what the cost of changing all this stuff, all your letterheads and business cards and invoices. Because it does affect a lot of people. It certainly would affect me, because this will be the second time the post office will be doing this. So I would, if they can move the post office 4 blocks and keep the same zip code and the same number, I have no problem with that. It's just that I think that it's somewhat ill-advised that they haven't really communicated to the box holders there as to what they're facing in the very near future. So that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have the overhead, please? Overhead, please. This is the official name of the location. It's the Civic Center box, post office box unit in San Francisco. Anyway, my name is Michael Nolte. I am here to speak on behalf of several community organizations, and each one has a different viewpoint. That's why I had to fill out different cards. For 101 Hyde housing development. The Alliance for a Better District 6 is neutral. Concerns are design changes of units. Units do not meet code, placement and open space, the amount of BMR units, and the displacement of a centralized postal services for the city as well as the Tenderloin. The North American Business Association is in support for adding 3 retail spaces. The Tenants Associations Coalition of San Francisco is against for building housing units that are not within the income of the majority of current Tenderloin residents, not enough BMR units. Displacement of general delivery services, and creating a construction zone for 18 months on a busy two-way streets, two different streets, Hyde and Golden Gate, that are very busy in the Tenderloin. I personally would like to thank the project sponsor and the architect for providing far more community outreach than other projects that have recently happened in the Tenderloin. I also would like to thank Kate Connor for her assistance with this project. I also want to point out that several of the organizations I just mentioned are also box holders, and there was an article in the Examiner on June the 2nd about the concerns about the relocation of this post office site. And even a reporter from the Examiner could not get answers out of the post office. And I have contacted personally several people at the post office, different departments, and don't get correct answers. And I've also contacted Pelosi's office. I have talked to the project sponsor with his thoughts on what's going on with the post office. But as a box holder who actually maintains 2 different boxes there, and I have for over many years, and I actually have a book in the library, main library, about the displacement of the 7th and Mission facility because of the 1989 earthquake, and those are in the reserve stacks. So I don't know a lot of information about this topic as far as the post office, and we would like to see a continuance because until the post office has been frank with the post patrons. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Okay, public comment is closed. Commissioner Antonini.
Thank you. Interesting questions here. I think this is a good project. In regards to the postal facility, which most of what the discussion has been around, postal facilities move frequently. In the small town when I grew up, where I grew up, they only had post office boxes and general delivery. There was no delivery originally, and then they moved to a full post office, and now they've moved 2 or 3 times since then. That's been over 50 years, but also out in 94132, they were at Stonestown. They've moved to the area out on Sloat Avenue about 10 years ago. So post offices do move, but the important concern here is keeping continuity for those who have post office boxes, and particularly for general delivery. Maybe I could ask Kate Connor about what the update is on that, because in your presentation, I think you said the general thought was that the post office boxes were going to be relocated to Fox Plaza, which is a very short walk away from this particular facility, and that is the case as far as you know.
Correct. That is the case. And the environmental planner was in contact with the United States Postal Service and did receive an email that they were planning to create a 500 to 800 square foot general delivery location within the vicinity of 101 Hyde. But I just do not think that an actual location has been determined at this point.
Okay, so they have plans, but they haven't actually figured out where it's going to be.
Correct.
And then my other question is, you said this is the only general delivery for all of San Francisco. Is that true or not?
I'm not positive about that, but I would not be surprised. I've definitely heard, but I could confirm.
Okay, but anyway, that is important, and as long as I'm fully supportive of the project, I just want to have assurances from the Postal Service that is in fact going to happen, and it's going to be generally in a close proximity to where this present one is. Okay, thank you. Those answers my questions, I believe, and I have some other comments. As far as the location, somebody said it's, a couple of blocks away. I forget what it is to go to Fox Plaza. It was noted here, but it depends where you live. Very few people live at the post office box facility at 101 Hyde. Everyone lives somewhere in that vicinity. Some may live closer to Fox Plaza, some may live further away. So the actual distance you're going to walk to get to your P.O. box will vary depending on the individual. The other thing that was brought up was the number of P.O. boxes at that facility, but I think someone commented and said some of them are only about 50% of them are active. So I don't know if anybody has any information on how many of these boxes are actually active at the present time relative to the full number that we have, but I can get that answer later. It provides 10 on-site affordable, which is what is required of the project. It's a good distribution of units, some larger ones, some small ones, and it provides eyes on the street, as the gentleman from the Golden Gate University said that from Hastings College, said it's a corner that has a lot of problems, and this will put eyes on the street because people will be living there 24 hours a day. Also, the retail will vitalize that area and might provide some retail services that are lacking in the Tenderloin now. And there are some problems with people whose post office boxes may have to be changed if they go to a different location. It may be possible that the actual post office box could remain the same. It would be the same zip code, I would think. And so that would expedite things, particularly those who have businesses at that particular post office box. You could ask that those remain the same. And I don't know, never want to say what the federal government's capable of doing, but it makes sense to me. But I'm not saying that would be done. So I think that all these things can be worked out. I think it's a good project, and aside from assurances that general delivery is going to be established, I don't see any other problems.
Commissioner Hillis.
So can I ask the project sponsor a question? Because you're probably more, you get better communication from the post office, I would imagine, given that you've got a lease with them than others do. It's probably hard to get in touch with the post office. But what's your lease with them now? Is it month to month?
No, it ends December 31st this year.
It is their plan to not continue with that lease regardless of the development?
There's no discussion at this time about that. They may terminate their lease or move sooner than that, but I can't speak on behalf of the Postal Service.
Right, but recognizing this concern, I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job of outreach and talking to people. We had a project here in the Tenderloin a couple weeks ago or last week that, there wasn't that great outreach. But recognizing that this was an issue, did you talk to the post office at all about?
We've talked to them for the last year. As a matter of fact, this lease was extended for a 1-year period from December 31st of last year to accommodate the post office because they knew this was coming down the road because of the closure over 5 years ago, closure list.
Right, okay.
So they're cognizant of it, and they're working with best they can, but it's a postal service.
Right, and you've got commercial space in the building. I mean, is there any discussion of the post office continuing to lease property from you in the new development?
No, because the building will be under construction for a minimum of 18 months, and I don't know if they want to play ping pong going back and forth in and out.
Right.
But that's up to them. I can't speak for them.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I agree with Commissioner Antonini. I'm generally supportive. I think it's a good project. It would be better to have the post office obviously responding to these concerns and on record. And, it's a little troubling that we just get one email from them in talking about their plan. So it would be great for them to be more open. But I think generally this project works and is good for the neighborhood.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, definitely in agreement with commissioners. I think Commissioner Antony was looking for this number. This is an underutilized site. In our packet, they said that about approximately 1,000 of the approximately 8,000 boxes are in use. So that's clearly underutilized for the amount of space that is on this corner site. And I agree. I have a couple questions about the design itself, but I agree that this usage, particularly having the ground floor retail, is a much better usage of that site. I do also believe, though, that having neighborhood services, including delivery services, is extremely important. And unfortunately, I don't know that we can condition this project with anything having to do with what the Postal Service is or is not going to decide. I don't think that that's the correct way to go. But I do want to ask Ms. Connor, based on your understanding, I don't know how much research you've done on this or how much you know about it because you've been working on this project. Do you know anything about what the Postal Service, what requirements they may or may not have? I mean, we know for the past number of years that they've had crazy budget issues and the billions of dollars in the red on their delivery service and continuing to go redder. And they have had a closure list that's been out there for a while. But do you know if they have any sort of policies or positions on providing general delivery and other sorts of more general services within a geographic area?
Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar exactly with what their policies are. I wasn't able to have consistent outreach with the post office, and a lot of the post office issues were kind of brought to my attention in the last, since your packets were distributed. I do know that on the environmental side, when the mitigated negative declaration was finalized, which is in your packets, there's comments regarding the post office, and that's when the environmental planner was able to contact them and talk about what the eventual plan is. But as far as general policy understanding, I'm just not very familiar with it.
Okay. I mean, I can see that in this, obviously, we can't speak for the Postal Service here. And in this time, thank you, Ms. Connor. And in this time, I just don't know that we can condition them to continue services if that's not in their plans, which we don't even know what those are. So that's just the comment on that. But I would like to ask the project sponsor or the architect, if he's here, about this project. So part of the Section 309 findings is we're looking at the rear yard requirement for some of the units and exposure. And I noticed on one of the schematic for floors 2 and above that there's no dimension for the length of the common open space. So you have units in the inner side of that courtyard, approximately looks like 4 units, that their only open space is that courtyard. And otherwise, there's no open space or no windows out onto open space. And there's no length or width dimension there. So if you could just tell me what that is, that'd be great.
Hi, Albert Costa. Yeah, the project is an L-shaped in plan, has a double-loaded corridor. Units that face the inner side. There's starting at the second floor, we have common open space, and then that translates straight up. Mm-hmm. And the units all have windows and natural light and air that face out over this.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, there's a total square footage of that, so it's 1848, yes. But what are the dimensions?
Could you show that on the overhead, please, what you're pointing to, so everybody watching can see as well? Thank you.
So, Commissioner, also one of the sheets, let's see, A2.3 has a little bit more information, and that the kind of approximate depth of that courtyard is 18 feet 6 inches.
Okay.
And the width of it, the longer dimension, is not specified, and I couldn't find that either. But given other dimensions that are listed, I would approximate about 100 feet.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. That's
correct.
correct.
Because if you multiply 18 times 100, almost, you get 1848. Okay, perfect. Okay, so great. The only thing is, the reason I asked the question, thank you, zoning administrator, is because the dimensions of the courtyard are different on your schematics than they are on another set of drawings that are provided in our packet. So in this one set, it's 1764, and in another set, it's 1848. and then only one set is one dimension provided for, like, I guess what we would consider the width of that courtyard, but there's no length. So that's why I'm asking the question. I just like the clarification. There's a little bit of inconsistent information here. And I'm only asking about it because that's key to the exposure requirements that we're looking at for Section 309, right, Zoning Administrator?
So the item that is before you of relevance here would be Section 134 for the rear yard. That's something that can be modified per 309. You are correct to note that in other cases, you do consider exposure, but for maybe not very well-known reasons, exposure is not part of the 309 process. So the 309, the variance is for exposure.
Yeah, so the variance is for exposure, but
Right.
Section 309 is only for the rear yard.
Correct.
But we're taking the two items together, so. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. No, I just want to clarify that the variance is for the exposure. That's not part of your decision. Sorry, the exposure is not part of your decision.
Right.
Just the rear yard.
Thank you for confusing everybody. But yes, I understand. Thank you very much. Sorry. You could respond. Thank you.
No problem. The square foot for the second floor area that you're talking about on this A2.3 is 1764 with 300 square feet of private open space. So the rest of it is common open space. So it's a little bit confusing maybe there. But so there's a mix between common and private there. There's some private balconies on the second floor.
Yeah, that I see that. Yeah. A question for you then. So then it would be 18 foot 6 inches, and the length would be what? Someone get a calculator.
Yeah, the length, I don't have the length right in front of me, but we could approximate it. So I
Okay.
don't.
And is that the final area for that common open space? Because there's another drawing where it's 1848.
Yes, that is the final. And then we have a common open space up on the roof,
Yes. Okay.
a very well-appointed roof.
Yes. It looks very, it's
Yeah.
very lovely. Thank you.
it's
Okay,
better.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Richards.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, we're here looking at rear yard exceptions. You know, I was in the Tenderloin a couple of weeks ago for the Turk and Leavenworth project that we heard last week, which we continued, and virtually every building constructed has a rear yard exception. There's just virtually no way to put buildings that close together and have any type of usable rear yard that's not shadowed or incredibly cold or windy. So every building requires a rear yard exception. I think if we saw one that didn't, I'd be incredibly surprised. I wanted to thank Ms. Connor because you really laid out exactly what it is before us today. So really crystallized in my mind all the stuff that I read, and you succinctly did it. So thank you. Interesting enough, we have this issue with the post office. We're trying to make a decision on a project. We'd love to have some community-serving businesses in the project. Post office got its own agenda, its own timeline, its own decision-making process. I guess the only thing I might ask, and I think some of my fellow commissioners kind of went down this lane, is to the project sponsor, the trust. If the post office were to say we want to have a general delivery again, would you be open to having them in one of the commercial spaces or allow them to create a commercial space in the nearly 5,000 square feet of commercial space that you have available to really offer community serving business?
Yeah, we've talked about that, and we would certainly welcome the discussion with the post office, but the post office doesn't want to discuss it with us right now.
Sure. I guess the question I have then for staff would be, could we condition the approval based on the project sponsor's agreement to give the post office kind of a right of first refusal on some of the space? If they came by tomorrow and said, we want some space for those general delivery boxes, could we do that? Not requiring them to do it, but, asking him that they make that space available.
I mean, if the project sponsor indicates that's something that they are willing to do, I don't think it needs to be adopted as part of any condition. I think it would have concerns about probably at a hearing such as this, crafting findings that were appropriate to justify that condition. And I think the city attorney is left the room momentarily, but I think we'd want to seek their advice as well about how we should craft that condition as well as the findings necessary to support it.
I'd like to explore that. Okay. The second thing, somebody brought up the issue with architecture. Maybe the architect or Ms. Connor can talk about putting this kind of architecture in that kind of a setting. Can somebody say a few words about that? Because I actually thought the design was good, but it is in a historic district. Can you talk about what the guidelines are? I guess maybe by the Secretary of Interior standards, let the public know why we have this kind of a building in that kind of a district.
Sure. Albert Costa, architect for the project. The site, the project is not actually in a historic district, but it is close.
Okay.
Next door, as a matter of fact. We went through a long process of back and forth on the design of the project, but we were looking to do a unique mix of contemporary and vernacular. So the corner element actually speaks to a bit to the historic nature of the surrounding fabric. So it has like these punched openings and these darker sort of low-scale building elements to them. And then on the sides flanking those corner elements is a little more of a contemporary flair. And these will be all done with contemporary rain screens and modern construction.
So you have a good mix of the old and the new.
That's correct.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I guess another question that somebody brought up was the BMR units. I understand, and maybe Director Ram can help me out here, maybe Ms. Connor. This is a rental project, and because we are granting some exceptions, the project sponsor did step up and actually did a Costa-Hawkins agreement saying that they would put BMR rental units on site, and they're doing it the maximum allowed by law.
Correct.
Okay, so we are not allowed to ask for any more. This is exactly what the law would require had this been a for-sale project.
What's proposed before us, yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. One other question I do have about the post office is somebody mentioned that this post office may move to Fox Plaza, which is slated to be demolished. Is there a project in the works that we're not aware of that we're going to have this issue come up again? Anybody
The Commission approved a project on that site 4 or 5 years ago, but okay. I think my understanding is that project is not moving forward, but we have heard nothing from that project sponsor in recent years.
Okay.
But my understanding is that I believe, I don't know that they formally withdrew the application, but they are investing in that building in other forms. So my sense is that building is going to be around for a while.
Okay. One other question, Ms. Connor, about shadows on open space. Another speaker brought that issue up. One of the shadowed spaces is UC Hastings, I guess, deck or common area. What's UC Hastings person got up and really adamantly supported the project. Can you make a comment on the shadow on these basketball courts? Is it public space? Is there any requirement there that we take a look at that?
Right, so I believe that the basketball courts are private space, and so a shadow study was done as part of the environmental work, and so there wasn't any sort of impact that was identified.
Okay. Let's see.
So, Commissioner Richards, sorry to interrupt, but I did contact the city attorney. They are on the way up, and we'll discuss the concern.
Right. I think before we make a motion, I'd really like to at least tease that one a little bit to see, because I think there might be some possibility for an agreement there. I'm very supportive of the project, and I would make a motion to approve it, but I'm going to hold off and wait for the city attorney to come back.
Okay. Commissioner Antonini?
Yeah, a couple of clarifying points on the exceptions. Read the report, and one of the exceptions we're granting is reduction of ground level wind currents. And what happens with these things is when you have these projects, they're normally expected to reduce the currents. When they keep them essentially the same, which is the case here, one goes up, one goes down, it's deemed to be an exception, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's the way it's written. So basically it's not making anything worse. It's leaving the wind currents the way they are now, essentially on balance. And then for Mr. Sanchez, is this a rear yard modification or exception? Because they're creating a rear yard that's really large, but it's not 25 foot all the way along. It's a large area in one corner of the building.
So it is a rear yard exception under the C3 zoning district for residential uses that required a 25% rear yard. And so one of the issues here as well is the fact that it's a corner lot. And so typically we want to have the building walls held on both frontages, and there's no way to accomplish that under the rear yard with the rear yard requirement. They are providing a relatively large amount of open space and that large courtyard, but it is not large enough to satisfy the exposure requirements. Part of the reason for that is the width of the lot, which is a bit less than 80 feet. And so there's simply not enough dimension there to give a code-complying exposure. It's actually quite close, but does not meet the technical specifications.
Because I know sometimes we consider it a modification if it's enough that it's not placed in the same location, but it more than offset. In this case, it still doesn't reach the level to be a modification.
You're correct. It's not a process that's available for the
Or
C3.
C3, yeah,
zoning.
not in the C3, you can't do a modification.
This is essentially a modification, but it's being sought through an
Not
exception
available.
process.
There's, as people pointed out, it's such a dense area, there's no possibility to build anything with a 25-yard rear all the way along. So, and then the other thing, even though it's for Mr. Sanchez, it's the exposure. You're going to, the amount of the ones looking out on the courtyard, apparently the exposure exception is because the courtyard was too small, but what size is it relative, what would be conforming then?
So if you were to take the frontage as Golden Gate, the requirement would be 25%, and which would be about 19.1 feet or so, and they're at 18.5. So they're
pretty close.
Pretty close. And also the fact that it's a corner property and that the building wraps all the way around, that also prevents it from meeting the technical specifications for exposure. But it is very close, and our design staff have reviewed it and found it to be offering exposure that still allows for quality units, but it doesn't meet the technical specifications for the code. And it's not to say that maybe we shouldn't reevaluate our exposure requirements at a later date, and maybe that's something we can have further discussions about to make sure that we have proper requirements.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important we are asked to grant these. That's actually one you're going to grant, but presumably, but it's important that everybody understand how close it is to being compliant. And then somebody brought up the environmental. There is an environmental document. We have the neg deck here. It has not been appealed. It does not show any significant impacts. So I think that has been handled. And I may leave it to Commissioner Richards. I think he wants to ask. I want to make a motion, but I think he'd like to ask about the possibility of including some kind of condition with the project sponsor being giving first right of refusal to the Postal Service.
I guess, yeah, my question was, the finding would be the existing postal business, regardless of whatever size it is, 500 square feet, 700, 1,100, is necessary and desirable to the neighborhood. We've clearly heard that from the people that have come out. Project sponsors made entreaties to the post office to see if they're interested in having a lease there. I know the post office's decision is completely independent, and we can't condition a project on what they do, but I did ask the project sponsor if they would make a space available to the post office should they so desire as a kind of right of first refusal at the project sponsor's required monetary compensation, et cetera. Is that something we can do?
No, the Commission cannot impose a right of first refusal. It raises a number of constitutional and other legal issues, both under the federal Constitution and the state Constitution. Including takings issues. Okay. And there also, California specifically also has a law that prohibits any commercial rent control, which is actually quite broad and could also be seen as prohibiting something like a right of first refusal.
Great. So my only comment then to the project sponsor would be I hope you'd still be open at some point in the future on your own accord if the post office approached you. It sounds like a long shot, but who knows, it might happen. So I move to approve the project as proposed.
Second.
Commissioner Richards, I'd like to offer maybe, it could be not the actual U.S. Post Office, but a private post office box, et cetera, whatever.
Exactly, I forgot about that.
And do a transfer from existing post office address, which they have on record, to a privatized post office.
Cool.
Okay.
Commissioners, there is a motion and a second to approve this matter with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Antonini. Aye. Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0. Zoning Administrator.
Close the public hearing, be inclined to grant the requested variances, noting that it's a corner lot and the lot dimensions as well.
Very good.
Commission's going to take a really quick break, and then next item, please. Thank you.
Do I have a sandwich or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the San Francisco Planning Commission regular hearing for Thursday, June 11th, 2015. I'd like to remind members of the audience to please silence any mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings, and when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name for the record. Commissioners, we left off under your discretionary review calendar for the benefit of the public. Item 10 has been withdrawn, which will put us on items 11 and 12, which will be called together. Items, for case numbers 2014.1021 DRP, DRP2, and DRP3 at 530, 542, and 548 Brannan Street's discretionary review, and case number 2014-1022 DRP at 208 Pennsylvania Street, discretionary review. We have the same DR filer and the same project sponsor for all of these projects. The DR requester will receive 15 minutes for their presentation with a 2-minute rebuttal, as will the project sponsor receive 15 minutes with a 2-minute rebuttal.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Rich Sucre, Department staff. The item before you is a request for discretionary review for the building permit applications associated with the proposed projects at 530, 542, and 548 Brannan Street, which is located in the RED zoning district and a 40X height and bulk district, as well as 208 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is located in the UMU zoning district and a 40X height and bulk district. The project includes the projects include establishment/legalization of new residential dwelling units at 530 to 548 Brannan Street and 208 Pennsylvania Avenue. At 530 Brannan Street, the proposal would legalize 10 dwelling units, thus resulting in 32 live-work units and 10 dwelling units. At 542 Brannan Street, the proposal includes legalization of 9 dwelling units, thus resulting in 36 live-work units and 9 dwelling units. At 548 Brannan Street, the proposal includes legalization of 7 dwelling units, thus resulting in 34 live-work units and 7 dwelling units. At 208 Pennsylvania Street, the proposal includes legalization of 4 dwelling units, thus resulting in 22 live-work units and 4 dwelling units. None of the proposals include any exterior alterations to the subject property or any physical expansion of the building envelope. To date, the department has received limited public comment on the project, most of which have expressed opposition to the project. The department has received numerous inquiries from tenants who requested clarification of the project and whether or not the project would result in evictions. The DR requester has a number of issues with the proposed project, some of which include compliance with the notice of special restrictions, lack of due diligence by the owner, public discussion of the live-work units. Since the project is not located within a residential district, it is not subject to the residential design guidelines. The department finds that the project comes into compliance with the planning code and finds that the project would establish new dwelling units, which would be subject to new development impact fees, including the Eastern Neighborhoods impact fees, as well as the affordable housing requirements, particularly for the Brannan Street properties. The proposed project has requested a variance from the zoning administrator to address the planning code requirements for rear yard, open space, dwelling unit exposure, and dwelling unit mix. As a result of the Eastern Neighborhoods planning process, the proposed projects are permitted within the underlying zoning districts, within their respective zoning districts. As we recently became aware of the DR requester's concerns about the compliance with the underlying NSRs associated with the live-work units, the zone administrator and the department's enforcement team will continue to work with the project sponsor to ensure compliance with the underlying NSRs and the live-work provisions. The zoning administrator can address any additional questions. As there appears to be no exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, the department recommends that the proposal is consistent with the planning code and the respective area plans, and recommends that the commission not take discretionary review and approve the project as proposed. I'm available for any questions, and this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. DR requester.
Sue Hastry, attorney for San Franciscans Reasonable Growth and former attorney for Citizens for Jobs, Art, and Housing. I am here for, I think, the 20 years after I went to the initial hearings at the Planning Commission on one of these projects. I think the first project was 208 Pennsylvania. Those projects, the projects at issue, had a design by a fraudulent engineer who had a collusive partner in the building department. And they went magically through the building department to construction. When the buildings were under construction on Pennsylvania, there were complaints that were filed by the neighborhood association, Potrero Boosters, about illegal construction. The first complaint was to Mayor Gallagher, zoning administrator, and it complained about a rooftop structure that had never appeared on any plans. It was immediately abated. The second complaint was filed when Larry Badner was zoning administrator. And the building was a Mariposa in Pennsylvania building at the time, was being offered as office rentals. And the files have disappeared from the planning department. I have been pursuing those plans all the time, all along, and the zoning administrator knows it. They have just disappeared. So there was enormous concern and complaint by people on Potrero Hill about illegal construction, and apparently no one ever bothered looking at the plans and looking at the permit from the planning department at the time. We have no record of it. The current owner is Essex Property. They inherited this mess that was created by the construction that was done illegally, but they had tenants in more units than were legally approved, and presumably they have been collecting rent all along. The core issue here is who is responsible for complying with the law? What is the responsibility of the zoning administrator? How does he do his job? How does staff do their job? If there is a colorable complaint on a developer and on plans, do they do anything about it? When someone is indicted for fraudulent plans, and the building department supervisor is also implicated, you expect the planning, I expect the planning department to go over that issue very well. There is nothing in the files. I have been going through the files on this project for months. And I invite the rest of you, though you're never going to take me up on it, to go through the same files. There is nothing in the files that really explains what happened on these projects. I was looking forward to a zoning administrator explanation of the circumstance, because these projects can only go forward with variances because they're not complying with the legal standards for housing units. Dwelling units have standards. They were built as live work. So they don't meet exposure requirements and open space requirements and everything. What is the thought process that the planning department has gone through up to this date? How did they sort this all out? There's no variance. We have no understanding of what the thought process in the zoning administrator's office was. And I assure you, there's nothing in the file to show the thought process in project review. There is a lot of emails that I got a hold of this past Monday on procedural issues and hearings. Who is involved from the planning department and the city? This was a letter I sent last night to Mr. Sanchez. It was my fourth letter. And so we come back to what your role is. Can you allow the planning department, not personal, planning department, planning commission allow a building to be constructed illegally for all intents and purposes and occupied illegally, and you just process the next round of permits without ever setting down by the planning department, not by the developer, not by a third party, but by the planning department. What happened on these projects? I don't necessarily disagree that these units should be allowed as housing. But what about the buildings? These are not units that are free-floating somewhere off in space. They exist in the 3 buildings on Brandon Street and the 208 building on Pennsylvania. Are you assured? What evidence do you have that the buildings are in compliance? One of the things that I understand, and you should understand, because I've tried, I cannot ask the treasurer for the compliance information on every live-work unit. If I make a request, tell me how many business licenses there are at 208 Pennsylvania, they don't give it to me. If the planning department asks how many business licenses have been filed and what units are they for at 208 Pennsylvania and the various buildings on Brandon Street, they will tell you. Because you're another part of the city. They won't tell you who. I don't think they will tell you who. But they will tell you that Unit 305, Unit 304 have business licenses, and they've had it in 2015 and go back 8 years. I don't find an inquiring mind at the planning department. So the statement that the developer gives, or the owner, I'm used to developers, excuse me, the owner gives saying it's part of our conditions of a lease. Oh, just every condition of a lease is maintained. They have offered nothing that shows any compliance. So because these are live-work units, they are not dwelling units, and people can't just live there. And they can't live there after the adoption of the Eastern neighborhoods either, because the NSRs are in effect in perpetuity until the building is changed. I would ask the city to agree with that, but there was no one here. You should ask that. Has a city attorney ruled that these buildings could be occupied as dwelling units if they're not converted? Or whether they have to, at all points, conform to the law that allowed live work? And what evidence do you have in the file? I am pleading, continue this hearing, and pardon me, if at least a draft the variance. Scott Sanchez can give you a thought process. What was the thought process that he went in through when he closed the variance hearing and said he's like to grant the variance? I don't have any idea because it's not available. So one of the things that you need to have is some thinking from the planning department and some evidence from the planning department. A letter from Essex attorneys is nice, but Essex is not the planning department, and you are the planning commission. You have a responsibility to listen to your staff and to the people. You can have evidence from the other side, but it should not be the only evidence. The files are missing. There was a fraud conviction. This is not exclusively these buildings. The same building, but the same expediter, the same person who drew the plans, also have 2 complexes for Academy of Art University. I'm dealing with 4 out-of-compliance buildings that are by Jimmy Jan Delta Architecture. 2 of them I commented on in the Academy of Art, and 2 of them here. You have my letters. The issues are responsibility. There was 5,000 live-work units. They were all approved in central, the waterfront area of Cherry Hill, south of Market, Mission, the only places they're allowed. And so we constructed 5,000 market rate housing units, not dwelling units in theory, and there is not one, no, there is 0 affordable units, 0. And you wonder why we have a problem in housing? These are rented without rent control. They're rented presumably at a rate that's with the best that the owner can get at the time. And we don't have much of anything to go on. I am pleading with you. What is your evidence from your staff? I have the evidence from Essex. What does the staff agree with? And why do they agree with it? How have they guaranteed compliance? And the bigger question that I asked yesterday, I'm sorry, in the middle of the night to Scott Sanchez and to other people, including Mr. Sucre, is who is the people that okayed this? Because when you read the letter from Essex, it's replete with people from the city agreed, people from the planning department agreed, and there's not one name. City staff, city officials, planning department, and DPI. Who signed off on this? Who did they meet with? And why is there no records in the file of them? There are no records. I've gone through the records. Maybe they are deep in the records from emails on various of, they're not in Mr. Sanchez's records because I've gotten his records. They're not in Mr. Sucre's records because I've got his records on the end of Monday. Perhaps they are in the records of supervisors and the mayor's office and people. It says DBI. I have no idea who they've talked to. So who is making these decisions? You are supposed to make the decision. This is an appropriate subject for hearing. It's not some crazy woman off in the bushes like, how would they want to paint me? I spent 6 years on this, a lot. Planning department spent 6 years on it, processing the approvals. They spent some time, presumably, dealing with the enforcement actions. I know they did because Mary Gallagher stopped construction. I have no idea what they did on the rest. So the timing is generous for me, but I ask you, what do you have as evidence that A, these buildings are being used, all of these buildings, the buildings are where the housing, the units are. Are the buildings legal? If you're legalizing some units, is it okay to legalize some units but not the building? It would be unheard of, from my experience, that the planning department has ever walked away from that issue. So can you legalize a portion of the units in a building without really knowing if the building is compliant when you have the ability to call the treasurer and say, give me this information? Not give me this information 3 months after you have a hearing and approve the projects, but going into the approval, you should have that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any speakers in support of the DR requester? Okay, seeing none, project sponsor.
And just to be clear, your team has 15 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alan Murphy. I'm here on behalf of the project sponsor, Essex Portfolio LP. We respectfully request that the Commission not take discretionary review today. There simply are no exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that would warrant taking of DR. Before getting into the details, though, I just want to put this hearing in context and really explain why we're here and why Essex is proceeding to attempt to obtain these approvals. The building permits at issue are part of an approval process with two main purposes. First, approval will allow all units in the Bennett Lofts properties to come into full compliance with city regulations. And secondly, and just as importantly, the approvals will maintain desperately needed housing units so that all existing occupants may stay in the already developed Bennett Lofts properties. Essex recognizes the acute housing shortage in the city and wants to be part of the solution to that by retaining units. With approvals, no occupants will be displaced, but if approvals are not granted, there simply is no other option but to evict existing occupants to comply with current city permits for the properties. Given that those are the two options and the current process is the only means of avoiding displacement, Essex strongly believes this is the better of the two options. As background, about a decade ago, a group of real estate developers unassociated with Essex developed the Bennett Lofts complex and divided several approved units into smaller units without proper permits. About 2.5 years ago, before Essex purchased the property, Essex looked into this and learned about these units and initiated discussions with the city regarding permitting the additional units. Those discussions eventually culminated in the current process to bring all units into compliance with the planning code. Last year, Essex applied for variances and building permits to allow designation of 31 dwelling units at the Bennett Lofts properties. The zoning administrator indicated in September 2014 he was inclined to grant the necessary variances to allow those dwelling units to be established. The approvals will allow units that have existed for years to conform to the existing zoning, which allows dwelling units. The Brandon Street properties are located in the RED Residential Enclave District, while 208 Pennsylvania is located in the Urban Mixed Use District. Without approvals, evictions of occupants in at least 15 to 20 of these units will be unavoidable. The current process will allow only for preservation of what the prior developer built. There will be no change in occupancy to the units, there will be no additional square footage added, and only minor interior work related to the units will be performed. In response to points that the discretionary review requester raised both today and previously, there's several broad policy questions she raises regarding live-work units, and we understand those policy concerns she has, but this simply isn't the proper forum for those debates. A citywide conversation already happened in 2013 when the Board of Supervisors rezoned the Brandon Street properties to allow for the establishment of dwelling units in that zoning district. If the requester's organization had concerns with that decision, then those concerns should have been raised at that time. And in addition, the application misunderstands the proposed project, which is not seeking to convert live-work units or change the use, but rather to actually permit units that never were permitted in the first place and really find a path to allowing those units not to be vacated. A second point is that the discretionary review requester argues that Essex may not be in compliance with the applicable notices of special restrictions. There may not be proper compliance there. That issue actually isn't relevant to the establishment of dwelling units because, of course, the NSRs apply to live-work units, not to the new dwelling units. But in any event, Essex is in compliance with all applicable NSRs that the DR requester has raised, and we are very open to continuing to work with the planning department to ensure that there is full compliance with the NSRs. As Mr. Sucre mentioned at the beginning, we certainly would be happy to continue working with planning on that issue. And finally, just in response to the discretionary review requester's concerns about affordable housing, the establishment of dwelling units actually will result in significant affordable housing fees paid by Essex to the city into the affordable for the affordable housing fees, in addition to other fees, all related to the establishment of dwelling units. So we think that that will not only increase affordable housing in the city, but also, of course, will preserve the existing housing at the Bennett Lofts complex. So in conclusion, Essex is committed to pursuing the current approvals to ensure that no tenants are evicted from their properties. We have additional individuals from Essex who can provide additional information on compliance or other issues if there are any questions. Thank you for your time and urge the Commission not to take discretionary review, but instead to approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, so we speakers in support of the project sponsor? Any? Okay. DR requester, you have a 2-minute rebuttal. Sorry, were there speakers? Thank you, Ms. Hester.
Hi, my name is Jose Casanon. I live in 208, Pennsylvania. I live for 12, almost 14 years, and I have family of 4. So my kids grown up in that place. That's a nice place to live. But now the problem is the old owners, they got a mistake that we had to pay because, they did it wrong in the beginning. So, but I agree with the new owners. They had to do what they had to do. That's they have to do. But we'll ask of them if it's possible we can live in the same place. Like, I cannot afford I'm paying more money in an old place because in San Francisco it's too hard to live right now. So I'm a disabled person, and it's hard to live in all places, and safety is Potrero Hill is nice, and for my family, that's what I try to come in on all the meetings and try to say, please, is it possible we can still live in the same place and don't raise my rent? That's all. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Jem Nguyen. I actually live in one of the units so I'm a little confused, and I just need some clarification, perhaps from Essex as well. So the last meeting that we were attending, from what I recall, there were a couple of units that were able to be legalized, and then there were a couple of units that weren't able to be legalized. And we're living in the units that supposedly weren't able to legalize. So we've been long-term tenants there. And when we rented with the old owners, and we didn't know that the units were illegal until about 2 years afterwards. And so in our last meeting, the understanding is that there's really not much that could be done with our unit, but if it were to be legalized, we would have to move. Our request is that if we were to move, we would move to another unit within the building, and to a similar unit, same rent, and the same location if possible with a lease. Right now we don't have a lease, we're month to month, and we're kind of unclear in terms of what the situation is going to be for us, and if we are going to be displaced or not. And from what I've heard from the last gentleman, I think the request is to not make any changes to the existing units, so I'm not sure how that would affect some of the units that potentially couldn't be legalized. Thank you.
Any other speakers in support of the project sponsor? Okay, DR requester, you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
I'm going to quote a thing from Ms. Justin to justifying their not filing a particular variance. There's due to the sordid history of permits on the projects and the lack of direction, they got their variance application in late. But even though they got it late, they got a hearing within accelerated by a month. So basically, the owner is saying, keep us from shooting our tenants. They're innocent people, and your decision is whether we have to have the axe fall on them. Is that the standard that the planning department applies? This is not a case of a building that was built in the 19th century and evolved into having 2 units, and you're trying to legalize one of them 100 years later. This was an active planning commission case, very contentious planning commission case. And the entire building was approved, not individual units. The entire space, every single floor, was allocated in the plans that the planning commission approved. And they changed it. Pardon me. The previous owner changed it. And the current owner is saying, it's too late to complain about these things. When is it ever the right time to complain? When a permit comes before you, when a variance comes before you. And I've not sat back. I've done those complaints. So the entire building is at issue. I don't disagree that these should be legalized, but you need to have full information about the state of the rest of the building. And you need to make basic inquiries, and if you don't, you're not doing your job. The planning department isn't doing its job. The planning commission isn't doing its job. Thank you.
Okay, project sponsor, you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Alan Murphy again on behalf of the project sponsor, and I have Ann Morrison here from Essex who can respond if there are any questions related to one of the public comments that was just received. Just a few points. We appreciate that the discretionary review requester doesn't disagree the unit should be legalized. And we just want to reiterate there essentially are two options, and it's imperfect because of actions of the previous developer. But given where we are today, the two options are either to go through this permitting process to allow the occupants to stay, or to reconform the units to the COOs, which would require displacement. So, I mean, those are really the only two possibilities, and that's why we've been going down this path and have spent significant time and money to try to accommodate this. Additionally, in terms of the question that was raised in public comment about about this individual's unit, this current process will allow most 31 of the 35 units that were created without permits to remain, but DBI has opined that 4 of those units cannot be retained because of health and safety issues. So for certain units that cannot be retained, if this individual is in fact in one of those units, then that we would certainly offer, Bennett Essex would offer another situation for a person to live within the Bennett Lofts property. So that's already been committed to, that everyone can stay within the properties. But if there are any units that cannot be retained in their current situation, then that would be why this is not 100% of the units will be retained in identical form. So if there are any questions, Ann Morrison also from Essex.
We may have questions. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the public hearing is closed, and opening up to commissioners. Commissioner Richards.
Okay, wow. I've been here 10 months, and not sure I've seen one this messy. I see a lot. I'm trying to look through all the smoke and all the emotional issues around, over the past 15 or 20 years, all the stuff that's happened here in this city, try to see through this and make sense of it. I think this does raise questions. I do know that it's complicated. Displacement is my number one issue, and it's unfortunate I didn't see in the staff report, but there might be people displaced because of DBI issues, not planning issues. But it would be my goal to make sure that whatever we do here in the end, nobody gets put out on the street. So I want everybody to be clear on that. Essex, you bought the property knowing there were issues. I appreciate the fact that you're trying to bring them into compliance. It's not easy. I do have some questions, I guess maybe, of the process for the variances that were issued for the units that did need variances. Ms. Hester, I was not clear on the issue of no thought process, no files, et cetera. Was there a public hearing held? And all that's available to Ms. Hester?
Yes, there was a public hearing held in September. Ms. Hester communicated concerns with me at that time.
Okay.
She did not attend the hearing. I heard the items, indicated that I would grant the variances. I did not issue the variance decision letter because there was the neighborhood notification was pending.
Okay.
That was completed, and there was the discretionary review filed, and it's before you. This has not been noticed as a variance hearing, but I did close the public hearing at the September variance hearing.
And you will make a decision in the future?
The decision was stated at the hearing as granting, but we have not issued the decision letter yet at this time.
Great. I think one of the issues that's interesting for me is how do we bring a portion of a building into compliance when another portion of the building might not be? And I think I heard Essex open to obeying the law. I think this whole reason why we're here is that they are. The fact that there are notices of special restrictions out there and that you've communicated those to the people in the other units, but they haven't been verified is an issue with me. And I heard Mr. Murphy for Essex say he's open to continue the dialogue and the discussion, and I don't think that I'd like to make a decision today until I understand that the whole building's in compliance, and I think Mr. Murphy agreed that the conversation could and should continue because we've been doing this now for 15 years or 6 years in the process. What is another couple of weeks? I also think, I guess I'd ask the zoning administrator this, if you pulled the file on the indicted individual that created this issue in the first place, the extent of the work that person did in the past, so there are like a lot of more phantom units out there that we're going to be seeing more of these on. Are you aware of what the scope of his fraud was?
It was fairly prolific. I mean, I think I think this is maybe a matter that I don't know that's completely resolved in the courts yet. But
so maybe
this wasn't the only project.
Yeah, maybe kind of a special project for an intern could be to pull the permit history on all these things this individual is involved in and see how many more of these units might actually be out there. Anyways, it's just a suggestion. I think we might see more of these. Who knows if more people, more outfits like Essex buys properties and discovers this. I think another issue is here we are legalizing 4, 14, 23, 30 dwelling units. Only 2 of them actually, only one of them is over 10 units, which I believe would require an affordable unit pretty much anywhere else, but we're not getting any affordable units.
No, they are subject to affordability requirements.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
So there's, okay.
And
So
I think they've
one of those,
elected to pay the fee.
okay, that's a good clarification for me. I guess the other question, a larger policy issue, and I don't think we should decide it here, and I do agree with the Essex folks, is maybe as a course of discussion for this commission over the next X months or years is we have these live work situations with all these NSRs. We approve other projects with NSRs on them. What is the extent of, are they really being followed or not? It's a big question for me. I actually have friends that live in lofts and they don't qualify, but they were told they had to have an NSR, but they don't. They're not business folks. They're computer programmers, and they work for folks down in the valley. So that's a larger issue for me. I think we should probably maybe put on the action item list to talk about at some point in the future, if you don't mind. So I'm comfortable supporting a continuance here pending my understanding that the rest of the building is in compliance.
I can perhaps address that question.
You might have some information.
Yes. So there is a notice of special restriction that requires at least one of the tenants in each of the live work units to maintain an active San Francisco business license. Did contact the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. That information is publicly available. Anyone with access to the internet can find that information on Data SF. I did a search on Data SF and found the following numbers. Now, again, this was just a basic search. It was only, I think, relatively recently where I had discussions with Ms. Hester and realized that this is one of the main concerns that she had, and found that for the 530 property, there were 32 live work units, but I found 17 active business licenses at that address.
Okay.
For 542, there are 36 live work units, and I found 15 business licenses.
Okay.
For 548, there are 34 live work units, and I found 22 business licenses. For 208 Pennsylvania, there are 22 live works, and I found 18 business licenses.
Okay. So there is a discrepancy in what should be happening and what is happening.
Yes, and there's, it's kind of, we need to find out more information about that, and, it could be that maybe some people and units have let their business licenses lapse. It could be that they may be misregistered under perhaps a different address. It could be that they don't have a business license, never had, but we would need to give them the ability to remedy. And there are 2 enforcement issues here. One is the illegal units, the 34 illegal units that were created, the 30 that can be legalized. That is being corrected by the permits that are in front of you. Right. Separate from that are the issues about the remainder of the building and those live work units and ensuring that they meet their notices of special restrictions. And what I've discussed with staff and with the project sponsor is that they're, in terms of compliance with that, they do have, it's been provided to us, the evidence that they have that in their lease agreements that the tenant must maintain the business license. So certainly if there are tenants who don't have the business license, that could be grounds for them potentially to evict those tenants. That's one way they could legalize that and address that issue and bring in tenants that have the business license. Or they could convert to a dwelling unit, which wouldn't have that obligation for the business license, but the choice would be theirs.
Sure.
And so what I would suggest is that we could work with them on an implementation plan. Perhaps some units they may want to go through the process to legalize as dwelling units, but others we could have them on a monitoring program with regular monitoring and over time ensure that maybe as tenants move out, and so we're not forcing displacement. Right. These are rental units that we could over time ensure that the people who move into those units the next go around are compliant.
I think that's a great solution, and I would recommend then we take DR and just do what you said and have a monitoring program as people move out, or if they want to convert them to dwelling units. I completely find that acceptable.
I don't think it would require you to take DR because that's not what's in front of you. What's in front of you are the permits to legalize the 30 units.
I mean, certainly there's an enforcement matter. I mean, beyond what this commission decides today, we have enforcement issues that need to be addressed, and it's our commitment to work with the project sponsor, and they've expressed their willingness to work with us to bring those units into compliance.
I guess, Ms. Hester, hearing what the zoning administrator just said, can I get your thoughts on that, please? Maybe you want to repeat it. She might not have heard everything.
I think I understand your question. What is the lifeover of a tenant? I was at a place for 17 years. If you say, as long as the tenant is there, if they are not in compliance with the law, they can remain. The big issue for me has always been there's been massive cheating on affordable housing money. Big cheating. And I'm glad you found out that these plans, I was never able to get business license information. I applaud that they've changed their procedure. But you rattled off over half the units are not in compliance. And if they're being occupied as dwelling units, they should be paying the conversion fee. And I don't care whether they build the appropriate windows, but I care a lot about affordable housing money and transit money. The two things that are cheated are transit money and housing
so
money.
maybe my direction, or if I may give or offer direction, would be put a sunset period into the process of 3 or 5 years. If after 3 or 5 years nothing comes into compliance, then Essex does agree to convert those to dwelling units, because you look like it's a long-term tenancy versus a live-work situation.
I think that's something that we can try to resolve through the enforcement process.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I would be in agreement with that. That sounds reasonable. You give them the chance, if there is an error, they really do have a business license, they'll have to produce it and show they are in fact conducting a business as per the NSR. If they aren't, then, we have to ask Essex as part of our approval process, not as part of our approval, but as an enforcement process, which DBI would do, or someone else in the city would do, to ask these to be converted to dwelling units and go pay the appropriate fees. So that seems to answer most of the concerns that were voiced, because, while I understand this is a touchy issue, we really can't refight the entire live-work war again. I mean, it's kind of, the decisions have been made, there is a process by which these units have to follow, and if those are followed, then that's over. So I think they're doing the right thing with the units that are being asked to be legalized. They're being legalized as housing units. They are paying the appropriate fees as well as the appropriate in lieu affordable, which is 20%, I believe, on all of these. 20% of the units that are actually being made into housing units. Aggregately, there are different numbers for different ones of these. And then to the point that we have, as DR requester talked about, all the live-work units, and, that's, again, kind of going over something that's in the past. And while none of them were deemed affordable at the time, there were buyers. There were buyers who rented to others, and it has provided housing for a lot of people and continues to do so, even though there is, it was not put in place in the right manner that, really has been used by housing in some instances without a work component. The questions that I have are all ones that were brought up here. I mean, there was a question about construction. I would assume that DBI has investigated the entire thing to make sure the construction is compliant and there aren't construction problems with what was built there, including the units that are being asked to be converted.
I'm not aware of any outstanding issues other than the fact that there are illegal units that are seeking legalization here. It sounds like DBI has at least reviewed and determined that 4 of those cannot be legalized because they don't meet building code requirements. But we have reviewed the originally approved plans because when this first came in, we wanted to decipher how these units were created to begin with. And, we saw how they were able to reconfigure walls, but I'm not aware of any specific outstanding issues with regards to the building as a whole or other elements of the building not meeting approved plans. Those specific complaints have been given that I'm aware of.
And the same with the quality of construction, and things are, obviously they were built quite a while ago, so one would assume that.
I can't speak to the quality.
Yeah, no, I'm not really saying quality. I mean the lowest standard, because there was DR requester at the very beginning of her presentation kind of brought up questions about whether these were adequately constructed, and I mean...
Yes, seem to meet at least the minimum requirements.
Yeah, so that I don't think... The other issue is all encapsulated in what Commissioner Richards had brought up, and I'm fine with that kind of us approving this with the admonition to the planning staff as well as Essex to follow what we talked about earlier as far as making sure that the units that were not in compliance become compliant, and if they don't, then there'd be a sunset period of, say, 3 years or whatever it is, 2 to 3 years to convert into housing units.
Commissioner Hillis.
Just a couple of questions. On the issue, you said you looked at kind of the old plans and saw how this was built. It seems complicated to me that, you got to put new kitchens in, new bathrooms. Are these units metered? So how did it actually work? I mean, did they go build the units and then immediately after divide them up and
Maybe the
bathrooms appeared?
Sponsor can speak to the meters, because in terms of the meters, that's not relevant
Not a building code.
to planning code requirements. It's you could have probably a multiple unit building on 1 meter. I mean, that's just more of an issue between
Right.
PG&E and.
But is that how? I mean, is that your understanding? The building was built and then received a COO, and they actually went and kind of ratted in bathrooms and stuff like that? Seems
Correct. That's correct.
Not
yes.
plausible, but it's not they built it and somehow convinced DBI that there were 40 units instead of 30 units. They went in and
No.
put new walls in.
Yeah, this was after the CFO, like you mentioned.
And before anybody moved in.
I'm not sure to the timing of when they did it.
Okay.
I can't speak to that, but
Yeah,
they installed walls and then added kitchens, like you said.
Yeah. It's just amazing that the city didn't catch that, or that kind of was able to happen on such a massive building and adding so many new units.
Yeah, we don't know when that took place. It sounds like neither does the
No, we don't have
property
any
owner.
records of that we can say with
Right.
any certainty.
I don't think that is correct statement. I think state law
Well, you can come up.
units to be metered.
Okay, thank you.
But are there meters for all the units? The illegal units?
Currently not, but that is part of the plans moving forward. We will
Oh,
put
so there
meters
were
in for every.
meters. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put meters so every unit that would be legalized has an individual meter at that point.
But I imagine when they built the project, they knew they were going to go put in walls to put in new units.
Yes, we make the same
So you
assumption.
put the plumbing in and
Yeah.
what? I mean, it's kind of a massive, kind of fraudulent activity that you would know you would go in immediately and put in. It's just a good case, I think, for DBI to look at and others.
Yeah, so I mean, if all those walls are plumbed and they just had to break open the sheetrock to access it, then
It had
how
to
did
be.
they get their permission to cover in the first place?
Right,
And,
right.
I mean, there's questions, but I'm sure DBI is aware of this, and we can bring it back to their attention as well.
Okay. And then, thank you for that. Oh, wait, just another question for Essex. Why not convert the entire building? I don't know if this is for your colleague. Why not just convert the entire building and get out of this? I mean, you've seen the affordable, I mean, I'm sure you've read up on kind of the live-work saga. It's a bit of a loophole to build residential units without paying fees and, meeting some of the, why not just legalize the entire building at this point?
I think Essex...
Or not legalize, convert to dwelling units.
I think Essex feels that the live-work units are fine the way they are, the ones that have the permits. And again, we certainly will work with planning to ensure that everybody's comfortable with the compliance with the NSRs. But it just didn't seem that it was necessary to take additional actions. I mean, I think sometimes it ends up looking like a bigger project to have a larger number of units. And here, really, there only is a need for the 30 or so units to actually receive permits. So just wanted to keep it simple and focus on those units.
Right. And I'm sure fees affect your decision, right? I mean, you'd have to pay fees on every unit you converted, so.
There
I mean,
would be
is there-
fees on all dwelling units.
Yeah, if you convert them, okay. And then to staff, on the affordability, some of these conversions are under 10 units. I mean, on the affordable fees, so do they not have to pay the fees on those? If you're converting just 8 units or 4 units in one case, do you not have to pay?
It'll be based on how we view the two projects. Since the 530, 542, and 548 were kind of looked at collectively, we would likely view the establishment of the units in that set of buildings collectively. So there would be assessed fees on the total number of new dwelling units.
So the fees would apply even though it's under 10 units because you view it as one project? And are you definitely viewing it as that? There seemed like a little hesitation.
I think that's been our intent, because under the planning code, when you have there's multiple contiguous projects. Really, it's one development project, and I think we would aggregate at least the 530, 542, and 548. The 208 Pennsylvania seems to stand on its own,
Right.
but the other three could be aggregated.
And is that the only fee that triggers on a number of units?
For both properties, the Eastern Neighborhoods impact fees for change of use from non-residential space to residential space would apply. So.
But is that only for 10 units or more? That's
That's for the square footage that's basically being applied.
So the 4 units on Pennsylvania would apply?
Correct.
But the 4 units would avoid the affordable housing?
Correct, yeah. They won't, because the threshold isn't established for 208 Pennsylvania.
I mean, that one would be nice to maybe require and not approve it and have them come back and ask for 10 units to be converted. I mean, if there's, if we've got, if you're getting out of, we can continue to see if they would, especially if there's 6 more units that are not in compliance.
There only appear to be 4 units that may be out of compliance at that building, so that would be 8 total. So even if they were to legalize the 4 that we couldn't find business licenses for, they're up to 8 and still would not be subject to.
But they have the option to convert them all if they want.
They absolutely could, yes.
All right. I mean, that's a little troubling on that one, that you kind of get out of the fee with.
Well, one of the things too to note, I mean, that the fees now are much greater than they were at the time these projects were approved. Had residential been allowed in these locations at that time, they would have had much less to occur and incur in terms of fees.
But the rents are a lot higher too, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And these buildings aren't subject to rent control.
No, that's correct.
All right, I mean, that one troubles me on the Pennsylvania property, but I agree with the kind of approach on the Brannan Street ones.
Commissioner Richards.
I guess, Mr. Sucre, the 4 units on Pennsylvania, I guess to Commissioner Hillis's point, what type of fees would they have generated had they been subject to the conversion of?
For both properties, the 2 basic impact fees that are established are the Eastern Neighborhoods fees, which both applies to both of them.
Great.
And then the affordable housing fee, or the requirement for affordable housing, which they're electing to choose the fee, which is only applied to the Brannan properties.
Right. So had those 4 units have been subject, let's say in our fantasy world, what dollar per square foot would have they been assessed, and how many square feet are they?
Well, that fee is based on a unit count. And it's based on a number for the off-site requirement.
Okay.
So, which is where the 20% came from.
Okay. I guess one other question for the Essex folks, maybe Mr. Murphy. Can you come up, please? It looks like we are having people being displaced. I mean, on the integrity of Essex property, et cetera, were you saying that you were going to be offering them the same comparable size unit at a comparable price somewhere within the Essex community?
There are only 4 units where the individuals would not be able to stay in that unit, but they will be able to stay in the Bennett Lofts properties. And perhaps Ann Morrison can speak further to the accommodation that would be given to them.
Right, so I've spoken with the woman that was up here earlier. I spoke with her at the variance hearing, and I talked to her earlier today, and our goal is to find them a unit within the Brannan Street properties that they'll be able to move to and relocate to, but this has been a bit of a process.
Sure.
And so they're remaining in that unit until we know that we're going to be able to proceed, and then we'll be finding another unit for them to transfer to.
Comparable price, I mean, you're not going to jack the rent up and force them to.
Right.
I mean,
we can't guarantee rents are always going to stay the same.
Of course.
Yeah.
I guess one of my comments then might be, I know there are some issues with these 4 units, but maybe we give them some time as well to work this out. I know there's another DBI issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the extent we can work with DBI on timing of that, happy to.
I'd hate to see
that.
people thrown out in the street. I mean, vacancies occur all the time. Maybe they could move from building to building or something.
Just so you know too, I mean, any delay in the kind of processing and issuance of the permits that would take this corrective action also do delay the collection of any fees as well.
Okay, got it. Okay. Just one last point. What I would ask, just respectfully, if you could do maybe a 6 and 12 month memo back to us on where this all stands.
Certainly.
Please. Okay, great. Very supportive. So I move to not take DR and approve the project as, not take DR and approve the permits.
For both sites.
Both sites.
Commissioner Johnson.
Okay, thanks. So just a couple of quick questions. So I just want to confirm that the 4 units we're talking about in 208 Pennsylvania Street have both DBI issues that would require the residents to potentially move, as well as the issue of legalization or conversion to a dwelling unit.
Correct.
Just checking. Okay, thank you, Mr. Sucre. So a couple things. I agree with the sentiments from all commissioners, so I'll keep my comments short. The first one is I just have a general request from staff. I would like to see maybe a table of the requirements for live workspaces versus the requirements or allowances if you're going to run just a business out of a residential unit. I know that, for example, if you are a sole proprietor with a consulting business, there are certain you are allowed to do certain types of business activities out of your apartment or house or whatever. And I'd like to see the difference between those two, because I really feel, honestly, that if we see these things in the future, we should be looking at those business registrations and looking at what type of business, because we should probably push for all of these to be dwelling units, frankly. I think over time, we have a lot of people who have legal business registrations, but they're running organizations that could potentially be run out of what we would consider a dwelling unit, so we don't have to come back here and talk about, are they in compliance, are they not in compliance, like what is happening. I think that would just be much easier for the planning department. I think it'd be easier for the city, and I think it'd be easier for anyone who wants to have a flexible lifestyle and wants to run a business out of their residence. So I would love to see that table. It would be helpful to have. I guess this didn't make it into our motion, but just in case someone was going to bring it back up in terms of, I thought we were talking about a period of compliance to look into the remaining units in these buildings and make sure that they actually have business registration, and if they don't, giving them a certain period of time to come into compliance. I think Commissioner Richards said something along the lines of 3 to 5 years. I'd like to see that shorter to a year or two. I think that's plenty of time to make sure these residents either have a business license for whatever their business may be, or they shouldn't be living in a live-work space if that's going to remain the law, and it's going to remain the type of land use that allowance that we're having for that space. So I don't think that's going to make it back in, but if it does, I'd like to see that shortened to 12 months. But other than that, just a quick question to the zoning administrator, maybe this might be the city attorney. So I remember, this is a totally different issue, but I remember when we were talking about the building on 3rd Street that had PDR spaces, and we had issues with having a percentage of the building be PDR versus commercial use, and so we wanted to be a floor so that it was easier to keep track of. The totally different circumstance, but I see the same set of reasoning here. How is it that we're allowing certain units in a building to be one type of use and the rest of the units to be another type of use, and how are we keeping track of that? So this is a question, not that I disagree with what we're doing, but just a question for staff or zoning administrator or city attorney.
They've identified these specific units, which would be dwelling and which would be live work, so we know physically which units are subject to which requirements. In terms of implementing that, it's much more straightforward than a large kind of open floor plan.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons. And if you have anything else to add, Mr.
Yeah,
Sucre?
I would agree with, in the case of the 3rd Street properties, I think in looking at the building for a long-term enforcement, it's harder to distinguish, specific spaces, given how businesses operate over a long period of time. And I think it's something that's pretty common when we look at office uses in the past, particularly during the 90s and the 2000s, and getting an accurate record of what was actually designated for office is always kind of unclear.
Okay, that makes sense. And then finally, I just agree with Commissioner Hillis. It's insane that it seems like this building was approved and then they went back in and did these illegal changes. It'd be interesting to know what happened, because it seems like maybe the inspection was done before the walls were put up, the coverings, and then they went in, because it seems like, why would you have a totally finished building and then start knocking it to pieces? So it's just an interesting question. Thanks.
Commissioner Hillis.
Just on Ms. Hester brought up there's 5,000 live work units. Is that accurate about the numbers that are around the city?
Since Ms. Hester, I think, keeps the list of live work units, I would
probably close.
That's probably correct, yeah.
Right. And then have we seen much in the way of kind of converting them to dwelling units or compliance or enforcement issues?
We don't have an active program of monitoring these live work units that have been approved. In terms of compliance, we do get complaints from time to time regarding them. It's pretty rare. We do have a couple units that have come in for conversion to dwelling units only. So it has come up. And live work, even though it's not a dwelling unit, is still subject to our dwelling unit merger requirements. So if someone wants to take a live work unit and make it fully commercial, then also it would be subject to Section 317. But
In the cases where there has been conversion, what are the reasons? What's compelling people to convert?
sometimes it's just ease. I mean, it's easier to have and to own something that is just classified as a dwelling unit rather than kind of the live workspace.
Right. Okay. And it'd be good, I know our enforcement unit is taxed, but just, do some, I know it's probably not high on the list, but because if you do convert, it's probably easier for the property owner to convert and the fees are paid. I would encourage this owner to pay the fees and convert everything instead of kind of jumping through the hoops of business licenses and whatnot. And then on the 208 Pennsylvania, if they come back and want to convert 4 more units next year and 2 more units next year, does the affordable housing fee kick in at some point for everything?
Yes, we do look at kind of recent approvals, and so we don't want a serial permitting to avoid the affordable housing requirement.
Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Richards.
I guess one last point, leapfrogging on the prior two commissioners' comments. I think this would be a fabulous project to look at if truly there's 5,000 units out there floating around that were live work, and we could easily run reports to see how many have business licenses or not. I mean, it could be, if this is any indicative of what the state of the problem could be, it could be massive. And we could have some type of an enforcement thing to actually convert them to dwelling units or whatever, and it would certainly help out the Affordable Housing Fund and whatever else we've got going, because these kind of units got the free pass. And I also support maybe an abridged or abbreviated enforcement timeline rather than 3 or 5 years, to Commissioner Johnson's point.
So enforcement is typically under the planning code, the purview of the zoning administrator, and that process is something that can be appealed to the Board of Appeals. I hear your direction. I like the idea of having it time limited, and so I hear the direction of having something less than 3 years. And
then thank you. Good.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, as a seconder, I'm supportive of that, but that isn't actually part of our motion because it's something has to be done separate. We've had findings.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, there is a motion and a second to not take DR and approve the projects as proposed. On that motion, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commissioner President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0 and puts you under general public comment, for which I have no speaker cards.
Is there any general public comment today? Okay, not seeing any. Meeting is adjourned.